And I asked him, what's your secret? He said, manga. I read manga religiously. And so I know how young people speak.
Yeah.
It's a non-didactic experience where people who don't know anything about this form or know minimally about this form can learn sort of at their own pace in their own location to see what manga is about, what this slice of Japanese culture is about.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week on Speaking of Language.
Storylines is a new exhibit at the Cornell Library about the history of manga and its relevance in Japanese culture. We speak with three of the minds behind the exhibit about its origins, as well as manga's continuing appeal.
Welcome to a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelica Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's media manager. Today, we have three colleagues from the library with us in the studio. Dan McKee, Karl Rozyn, and Aparna Ghosh curated an exhibit on manga titled Storylines, Visual Narratives in Japanese Pop Culture.
We look forward to hearing more about the history of manga, connections to anime, and how the comic book universe can be integrated into learning and teaching. Welcome to Speaking of Language, Aparna, Dan, and Karl.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So before we dive into this manga universe, can you please share with our listeners a little bit more about you? What's your background? What do you do at the library? And do you have any connection with languages? Obviously, interest in Japanese culture, but any of that. Karl, do you want to start?
I came to this route. I have a master's degree in museum science from the University of Washington. I've been designing exhibits here at Mann Library and at the Asia Collection for just about 5 years now. I did some French work, 4 years of high school Latin, which was fun. My father was from Germany. Him and my grandparents both spoke German in the home to each other.
Oh, cool.
Which was very nice. But I don't have much modern formal training. I've been teaching myself Norwegian very slowly.
Oh, cool. Fun.
Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Aparna, how about you?
I'm the administrative supervisor at the Eccles Collection on Southeast Asia. I like studying languages, so I've taken a lot of classes here at Cornell. My parents speak Bengali at home, and I've taken classes in that over here at Cornell. I've also taken a couple of language and culture classes. So I think I did Vietnamese and Singhala over here at Cornell.
Nice.
And yeah, I guess I've studied other languages too. When I was in school, I studied Hindi and Bengali, and I guess now I'm trying to casually learn French. But yeah, I like doing it. So yeah.
Dan, what's your story?
So I'm Dan McKee, the Japanese bibliographer in the Wasing Collection on East Asia. I am a very typical American horrible language learner. I ignored my high school teacher for 4 years thinking, why am I studying Spanish? Why do I have to do this? Then I took on Japanese at university, went through a few years of Japanese study, but really couldn't speak, and I was frustrated. So I said, I need to go to Japan. I need to immerse myself.
There you go.
So I did, and it took years. And I still fumble and stumble as I try to get things out sometimes. But living there for a while sort of opened the door after a while.
Yeah.
And then I came back to Cornell after Japan and did some grad work here, studied Chinese and French for reading knowledge, which is the one everybody uses to get through grad work.
Exactly. I did that one too.
I just realized I forgot to mention Japanese.
Oh.
And that's why we're here.
Good. Covered now. Can you tell us a bit about how the idea of a manga exhibit came about?
This one is Aparna's contribution to the process. So I think she should lead.
I guess it's really a case of we had had to plan a number of exhibits in advance. What should we do? Like we put ideas out there, like within the Asia library. And I was the one who threw out manga because I did my bachelor's thesis on it. So, yeah, and then it got picked.
I think Aparna is a bit humble. I think Aparna pushed it.
I did not push it.
Quite a bit and said, would you work with me on it? And my guilty admission is I know very little about the universe of manga. I had to really research for this exhibition. Aparna and Karl know far more than I do. They've read much more than I have and had many more experiences than I have. But yeah, Aparna said, would you work on it with me? And I said, sure. And there it was.
And there it was.
Karl, you have a personal interest in manga then as well?
Mostly I've just been a fan for a long time. Back when I was in high school, the movie Akira was very big.
Yeah.
And from there, just living geek life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just dove straight in, I've been reading manga, watching anime really my whole life.
Yeah.
When I started college, I went to this little school in Ohio called Denison University. I just fell in with a bunch of international students as friends, and then some of them were into manga, and that's how I really got into it. And then I started taking Japanese language classes. I sort of used manga till every once in a while, especially when I went to Japan mostly, but I used those to learn a bit. And yeah, I guess during my senior year, I decided to study gender and sexuality in manga. So yeah, that's what happened
Very
with that.
interesting. So what is the history of manga? How did manga come about?
Oh, boy.
How much time do we have here?
I think I'm going to focus on the linguistic aspect of it, which is kind of interesting. The word manga does not go back that far. It goes back to about the turn of the 19th century. So 1796, I think it was first coined. And it's made of two Chinese characters, one meaning flowing or flooding, and the other one meaning drawing or picture, painting. So there was a literary form called manpitsu, the same man, and hitsu is a brush.
Okay.
And that was sort of like a free-flowing series of anecdotes by an author where he gives opinions and lists of things in everyday life. No real structure to the narrative, just a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And so my theory, I have never seen anyone explicitly say this, but when manga the word emerged, it was based on manpitsu. So that sort of free-flowing, lots of, in this case, imagery, lots of drawings, pictures. And the most famous example of that is the Hokusai manga. Hokusai is the artist, the woodblock print artist who's famous for that great wave with Mount Fuji. Yeah. Everyone knows that one.
Yep.
But he was actually more of a book illustrator than he was actually a single sheet print artist. And he, over his life, produced 13 books of these wonderful images, and then 2 were posthumous. So that was the origin of manga. It just meant a bunch of pictures. Now, the images in the Hokusai manga were very funny, very often. Not all of them. Sometimes it was just, here's how you draw fences, and here's 20 different fences. Here's garden implements. Here are 20 of those. But often they were very witty. So that word manga became associated with comedy. Kind of free-flowing, light sketches. Then it became actually political comedy.
Sure.
So a one-off political cartoon could be called a manga. And then only in the early 20th century did it take a kind of form that we would recognize now as a comic book. The history is quite interesting. And the way the term has been used over time has really changed. So in our exhibition, we wanted to look at really the post-war manga, which is the form of manga everyone is familiar with as a comic book, telling a story through, visual imagery and then often just what the characters are speaking. A little bit of narration sometimes as well. But that is very particular to post-war Japan. Post-war Japan was a time when American culture was flooding into Japan with the occupation, and people were really eager just to relax. So all forms of popular culture took off. During the war, people had been so grim and serious, and now they said, we need to go in a different direction. So popular music takes off, entertainment like pinball and manga becomes a very big thing, and animation right after. So that's kind of the moving from the background into the form that we know as manga now. The development after the war is another story as well, because initially it was really for children, but then began to develop. Well, adults read the things for children and really enjoyed them, and it was decided, there's a bigger market here. And now it's 40% of Japanese publishing, so huge phenomenon in Japan.
And for our listeners, could we get maybe a quick description of the connection between manga and anime?
It's they're really very hand in hand. Anime is animation. The the post-war early manga is very influenced by particularly Disney. So if you look at the early titles like Astro Boy or Princess Knight, a lot of the imagery is very similar to that, fun, almost cute Disney feel. So then that immediately lends itself to animation. So Astro Boy got animated very early on in the 50s. And then that just grew. So as both industries continue, it's just like this circular feeding into each other where a manga gets written and then eventually an anime adaptation is made. Then that goes back into a different manga cycle, and then you have a live action spin-off of that, and then, it all just keeps feeding back into each other. It's almost one continuous culture. Like Akira, which I mentioned earlier, when that film was made, it was made in the middle of the manga production. The manga didn't finish for another 4 or 5 years. So it comes in waves. It's a very the whole industry just is almost one piece.
So there's a broad appeal to many different target audiences for manga. What do you attribute that to?
Part of it's that manga is really more of a form, like novel is a form. There are so many different kinds of manga. We get everything from children's stories like Doraemon to Ghost in the Shell, which is very advanced thought about cybernetics in a dystopian future. So there's Aparna has studied very different from all of that. So there's
I think I studied Boys Love, which is books for a female audience mostly, but about gay male relationships. So there's something for everybody in manga, which is why we think there's that appeal.
I think it's also a more uncensored world than something, say, like a TV drama or something. There are things that that you can get away with in a manga that would be more difficult
Sure.
to do. So I'm always, as I was working on this exhibition, I was continuously kind of impressed at manga's sort of foundational role. It is true that sometimes the animation will come before the manga is complete, or there'll be a manga based on a novel. But manga is more often the seed for all these other things. So, it's when a manga achieves some success most often that it becomes an anime or takes on another life as drama. But you can get away with a lot more, I think, in this form because it's sort of a private experience. And so I think the authors know how to tickle their audiences. They really, they know what will appeal to people.
Yeah.
Dan, have you ever noticed, if you're on a train in Japan, people are reading manga, but they have covers on them, so other people can't really tell what you're reading.
That's true.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is
I saw that a lot.
Yeah, that's actually a sort of challenge in doing the design aspects of the exhibit, is that there is so many of the interesting and dynamic panels in manga are more either adult-oriented or very violent. And it's difficult to strike that balance where it's interesting and dynamic, but you can put it up in a hallway where anybody is going to be.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about the exhibits? What do people see in storylines, and where is it?
We'll start with the easy question. It's in the Kroc Library hallway that goes past the Asia reading room. So right when you enter Kroc Library through Olin Library, you will see it in the hallway there. It's not an ideal space. In other words, it's not an exhibition space in and of itself, but so many people pass through to promote the collections and grab people's attention. We've been putting up exhibitions now biannually to get them looking. And wow, have they been looking at this one?
Oh, I bet.
It's been really popular.
Appealing,
People taking selfies. I've seen a family all gathered in front of one. People carefully reading, which makes me really happy.
Yeah, that's great.
Very happy.
Yeah.
And I think it's, so far I haven't heard really any criticisms. I'm sort of waiting to be like someone telling me, oh, you missed the point on this one, or because it is a new world to me. But so far it's all been good.
Yeah.
And there have been some teaching requests that came out of this exhibition as well. So we're engaging with language teachers and faculty and even the Japanese Studies Club at Ithaca High School.
Oh, cool. Oh, how fun.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They're coming tomorrow.
That's great.
So that brings us to our next question. How can educators and learners use the exhibit, especially for language and culture learning?
From a cultural standpoint, it's a non-didactic experience where people who don't know anything about this form or know minimally about this form can learn sort of at their own pace in their own location to see what manga is about, what this slice of Japanese culture is about. For linguistic purposes,
for language learners, wow, there's probably no better way to understand how real people speak in Japan. I went through a couple years of formal Japanese language training, and I got to Japan, and I'm like, what are they saying? I cannot understand because everything's in a shorter form. Everything is clipped.
Sure.
There are certain patterns of speech that just were not covered in textbooks.
Yep.
And one day I was in a bookstore, and there was another American there, and we started chatting, and we were hanging out, and he was speaking things in Japanese, and I was so impressed. Like, how long have you been in Japan? And he said 2 months.
Wow.
And I'd been there for 2 years or something. And I'm like, how does this guy speak so well? And I asked him, what's your secret? He said, manga. I read manga religiously. And so I know how people young people speak.
Yeah.
So we do have a really good collection in the library that we hope language learners and teachers can use. I'm not sure how language teachers feel about manga because, it is, again, that sort of everyday level,
sure.
very informal speech patterns in general. So that's good if you're going to Japan, but maybe that's not what you want your beginning students to learn first.
But I can add to the whole, the writing system. Manga's pretty good with that, especially if you're reading, I guess, books that are geared more towards younger audiences. So they'll usually have what's known as, I don't, if you want to talk more about the different writing systems within Japanese, there's the Chinese characters, and then there's the two, what do you call it, hiragana and katakana.
Right, so two phonetic syllabaries.
For these books that are aimed towards younger readers, they have the furigana, which is...
So furigana are small little phonetic characters written alongside the Chinese characters so that you know how to pronounce them.
Yeah, so it's that was really helpful for me, when I was learning kanji, for the actual characters, that I can see being very beneficial to language learners, especially when they're learning the writing system.
Very cool. How long is this exhibit up for?
It should be up through at least the middle of July. Odds are probably more like the end of July.
Okay.
The next exhibit should go in probably early August. That's our rough schedules, try to get things in for the starts of the semesters at the university.
Awesome.
We're having a round table talk on Friday, March 13th in 106G Olin with Andrew Campana, Gregory Lond, and Jimmy McKee. Andrew is from the Asian Studies department. Gregory is from the English department, and Jimmy is a big fan of manga, and he works at Man Library. So we wanted to invite people to come and listen to them and have a conversation with them about manga.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Andrew's great. He's been on the podcast before.
Oh, yeah.
I'm so looking forward to meeting him. He sounds like such an interesting man.
He is.
Well, I highly encourage everybody who is in the Ithaca area to check this out. Storylines, visual narratives in Japanese pop culture. Very cool exhibit. Thank you so much for curating that. Really interesting and fascinating. And Dan, when you gave a presentation about this exhibit, you talked a little bit about your thesis work and a very early visual representation of a story. And I thought it was hysterical, so would you mind please sharing with the world? And Karl and Aparna have heard the story probably 5 million times.
More than I care to say.
Okay. One of the cases in the exhibit looks at precursors to manga. So we're really looking at Japanese art history, things that the term manga has been applied to, but then also at some of the first attempts to put visual images of figures together with the words that figure is speaking. And so, yes, my master's thesis when I was a grad student here at Cornell was on a 14th century picture scroll in Emaki called Fukutomi Zoshi Emaki. Fukutomi is the name of the character. And Fukutomi is poor. His wife begs him to go to the shrine and pray to the gods so that he can be given a special talent and then make his fortune. So he does this religiously for 7 straight days. The 7th day, he has a dream that a bell is ringing inside of him. And so he goes to a dream interpreter, and the dream interpreter says, "A voice will emerge from inside of you, and following that voice, you will make your fortune." And he says, "Voice emerging from inside of me, I know what that is." And he gets up and he begins to fart. And his farts come out musically. And so he goes out on the street and begins to perform. The crowds gather. They're showering him with treasure. A noble comes by and picks him up, takes him back to his palace where he performs for all the aristocracy. And they love him. He's a big hit. They give him treasures, robes. He goes home, and it's a sort of happy ever after tale. There is a sequel that's about his neighbor who tries to copy his performance and fails miserably. I won't go into detail on that, but is horribly beaten by the nobles and sent home.
Salieri to his Mozart.
No, there has never been a manga version of that, unfortunately. I think it could be a good story, but it was the first work in Japan to like a manga, put the words of a character by an image of that figure.
I guess we all have our own talents, right?
That's the moral.
Yeah. You never know what voice will come out from inside you. I don't know.
Keeping it classy here on Speaking of Language.
Always.
All right. Before we sign off, we'd like each of you to share your favorite word in a language you speak or have learned, are learning, or want to learn. So, Karl, would you like to start?
So many choices. The one that I said, I don't know if you guys asked me this. Pardon me, my German is terrible. Is Backpfeifengesicht.
I love it. Nice. That is a good one.
For those who are at home, that is a face badly in need of a fist.
That's a good. See, that's a descriptive
It's a word
language.
we need so badly in English.
Yes.
I like it. Aparna, what's your word?
I guess among that sort of like having a word that says things in other languages like you can't. Like, so one word I guess I really like, it's from Bengali and it's the word naka, but you can't really like, there's no like exact translation. So it could mean something like someone who, like an adjective used to describe someone who's really squeamish, like screams at the sight of a cockroach, but it can also be someone who's really picky about like something like food. Like it's, but it's like whenever it's used, it's kind of an insult. So yeah, and it's just like something we keep saying all the time. Oh, you're so naka.
I'm going to use that on you.
When
can't
would that
pronounce
occasion
Karl.
ever come up? Come on.
We work closely together on a lot of projects, yes.
Well, Sam, I'm going to call you Backpfeifengesicht from now on.
Them's fighting words.
Dan, what's your word? Are you also going to throw in an insult here?
No, I'm going to go with a nice one. I love those words that we don't really have an equivalent for, like what Aparna said. But a recent one I ran across was shinnin-yoku, which means to bathe in the green of forests and groves, something like that. So like
nice.
sunbathing for greenery.
Cool.
That's Japanese.
Japanese.
Great. All right. Well, Karl, Aparna, Dan, thank you so much for speaking of language with us today.
Well, thank you for having us. It's been great.
Thank you.
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu or look for Cornell LRC on Facebook and Twitter.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelica Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
Recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.